Abandoned buildings have always carried a strange kind of weight. They were not just empty places. They were reminders of lives that used to exist inside their walls. Classrooms where kids once laughed, hospital rooms that heard the last breaths of patients, homes where families tried to build something that didn't last. And when those places are left behind, they don't just become forgotten. They change, they decay, they rot, and sometimes they feel alive again, but in the worst possible way. People go into these buildings looking for adventure, for photos, or just to feel the thrill of breaking into somewhere they're not supposed to be. But sometimes they find more than just broken windows and dust. Sometimes they find something waiting for them. These are for disturbing true stories about abandoned buildings. Story 1. The abandoned school. This happened back when I was in college. I went to school in a small town that honestly didn't have much going on. It was the kind of place where most students just went home on the weekends. So if you stayed on campus, you had to make your own fun. A couple friends of mine were into urban exploring, and there was one building in particular they had been talking about since freshman year, an old elementary school on the far edge of town. Supposedly it had been closed down in the 70s after a fire broke out in one of the classrooms. No one had died, at least according to the official record, but people in town liked to joke that the school had been cursed ever since. We'd driven past it a few times. From the outside it looked exactly like the kind of place you'd expect to be haunted. Tall brick walls, busted-out windows, vines creeping up the sides, and a big rusted chain on the front doors that had clearly been there for decades. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown, with weeds sprouting up through the asphalt like nature was slowly reclaiming the whole place. My buddy Aaron was the one who finally convinced me to go inside. He was the kind of guy who thrived on adrenaline, always pushing things too far just to see if he could. Another friend, Melissa, decided to tag along too. She was into photography, and she said she wanted to get some creepy aesthetic shots for her portfolio. We went on a Saturday night. The plan was to sneak in through the back, where part of the wall had collapsed and created an opening big enough to crawl through. By the time we got there, the sun had already gone down, and the only light was coming from the moon behind a thin layer of clouds. I remember hesitating at the opening. Something about it just felt wrong. The smell hit me first. A mix of mildew, burned wood, and something else I couldn't quite place, like old dust that had been sitting undisturbed for too long. But Aaron was already inside, and Melissa followed right after, so I forced myself to crawl through. The inside was worse. The floor was covered in broken glass and scraps of ceiling tile. The walls were lined with old lockers that had rusted shut, and the air was thick, like it hadn't moved in years. Melissa started taking pictures right away. Her camera flashed, lighting up the hallway in bursts that made everything feel even creepier. We started walking toward what had once been the main classrooms. Every step echoed like the building itself was hollow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being too loud. At one point, Aaron picked up a piece of chalk from the ground. It must have been sitting there for decades, but somehow it hadn't crumbled completely. He laughed and wrote something stupid on the board in one of the classrooms, just his name in big letters. But when Melissa took a picture of it, she froze. She looked down at the screen on her camera and then back at the board. "What the hell?" she whispered. When I looked, my stomach dropped. Aaron's name wasn't the only thing written there. Below it, in the same chalk, in handwriting that looked almost identical to mine, were the words, "Get out." Melissa immediately lowered her camera, like she didn't even want to look at the photo again. Aaron tried to brush it off, saying maybe it was already written there and he just didn't notice. But I knew for a fact the board had been blank before. I had been staring at it while he wrote his name. I told them we should leave, but Aaron wasn't having it. He laughed, said some local probably came in here years ago and wrote it as a prank. "You're letting your imagination get to you," he said. Still, there was a nervous edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. We kept walking deeper into the building. The classrooms gave way to a long hallway that led toward what used to be the gym. Our footsteps echoed, and the farther we went, the colder the air got. The smell of burned wood was stronger down there, mixed with something metallic. When we finally pushed open the double doors to the gym, the place was pitch black, except for the faint moonlight shining through the broken windows near the ceiling. The basketball hoops were still there, dangling crookedly, one of them swaying just slightly like it had been touched. Melissa lifted her camera again and took a few pictures. The flash revealed peeling paint, collapsed bleachers, and something else. In the far corner, behind a pile of debris, I swear I saw a figure. Just for a second, in the burst of light. I froze. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Neither of them answered. Melissa lowered the camera, her face pale. "Yeah," she said quietly. Aaron shook his head, muttering that it was probably just a shadow. But then, from across the gym, in the same corner, came the sound of chalk on a blackboard. Slow, deliberate, scraping letters being written. The problem was, there were no chalkboards in the gym. Aaron swore under his breath and backed toward the doors. Melissa clutched her camera to her chest. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. The sound went on for a few more seconds, then stopped. And then, in that same unnatural silence, a child's voice echoed through the empty space. It was soft, it was calm, and it said, "Class dismissed." Aaron didn't even try to argue anymore. The second that voice rang out, he bolted for the doors. Melissa and I were right behind him. The sound of our footsteps echoed so loudly in that gym, I was terrified we'd hear something chasing after us. When we got back into the hallway, I swear I heard lockers slamming shut one after another, like something was moving right behind us. I didn't dare look back. We sprinted down the hall toward the hole we had crawled through to get inside. My lungs were burning, my legs felt heavy, but the fear kept me moving. Melissa dropped her camera bag at some point, and when she slowed down to grab it, I yelled at her to just leave it. The sound of that child's voice still echoed in my head. By the time we reached the opening in the wall, Aaron was already outside, pulling himself through. Melissa scrambled after him, and I was the last one left inside. For half a second, I turned my head toward the dark hallway we'd just run from. I swear, right at the end of it, I saw a faint light, like a flashlight beam, except none of us had left one behind. I didn't wait to see who or what was holding it. I crawled out, cutting my hands on the jagged bricks, and didn't stop running until I was back at the car. None of us said a word on the drive home. Melissa sat silently in the back seat, staring at her camera. When we finally got back to campus, she told us the strangest thing. Every picture she had taken inside the school was corrupted. Just static and warped streaks of light. Every picture, except one. It was the shot of the chalkboard. It's the one where, under Aaron's name and handwriting identical to mine, it still said, "Get out." Story 2. The psychiatric hospital, back when I was in high school, was a place everyone in my town whispered about. The old state psychiatric hospital. It sat on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with rusted barbed wire. The buildings had been shut down for years, after allegations of abuse and neglect came out, but no one ever tore it down. The whole complex just sat there, rotting. From the outside, it looked like something out of a horror movie. A rows of brick wards with boarded-up windows, a crumbling clock tower in the center, and long, overgrown paths that used to connect the different buildings. Everyone in town called it the Hill, because it was built on the sloping ridge that overlooked the city like a prison. Naturally, every kid I knew dared each other to sneak in at least once. And one night, my best friend Kyle convinced me to go with him. He hopped the fence around midnight, using a section where the wire had already been cut away. The moon was bright enough that we didn't even need flashlights, though Kyle brought one anyway. We picked the main administration building to start in, mostly because the front doors had already been forced open. The air inside was stale and suffocating. The walls were peeling, old wheelchairs and gurneys were scattered in the hallways, and there were paper files everywhere. Patient records, handwritten notes, appointment logs. Most of them had been torn up, but a few were still intact. Kyle laughed as he flipped through one of them, reading the doctor's notes in a mocking tone. But then he stopped. He looked down at the page, frowned, and whispered, "Why is there today's date on this?" I thought he was screwing with me. But when he shoved the file into my hands, I froze. The sheet looked old, yellowed paper, faded ink. But right there, written in neat block letters at the top, was the current date. The exact day we were standing there. We dropped the file and kept walking. The deeper we went, the worse it got. Doors were hanging off their hinges, paint curled off the ceiling in strips, and graffiti covered the walls. But what unsettled me most was how many of the doors had scratch marks. Not graffiti, not vandalism. Actual scratch marks, deep gouges carved into the wood. Some clustered around the door handles like someone had been trying to claw their way out. We reached a wide hallway lined with patient rooms. Most were empty, just rusted bed frames and peeling paint. But one of them still had a mattress inside, filthy and covered in dark stains. Kyle made some joke about it, but I didn't even respond. My skin was crawling. That's when we heard it. A voice, a low, shaky whisper that echoed from somewhere deeper in the hallway. At first I thought it was another trespasser, maybe a homeless person living in there. But then I realized the voice wasn't speaking English. It was murmuring something in a language I couldn't place. Kyle froze. The whispering stopped. And then, clear as day, in a voice that sounded like it was right behind us, we heard, "Don't leave me here." Kyle whipped around with his flashlight, shining it down the hallway. There was nothing there, just empty doorways and peeling paint. But I swear, for half a second, I saw the mattress in that one room shift, like someone had just gotten up from it. I whispered to Kyle that we needed to go. He didn't argue. He started walking quickly back toward the entrance, trying not to break into a full run. Our footsteps echoed off the walls, and every sound felt magnified in that empty space. As we passed the nurse's station, something caught my eye. On the desk was another file folder lying open. I don't know why I even looked, but I did. When I saw the name on the file, my blood ran cold. It was my name, first and last, written neatly on the patient line. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I just backed away, my legs trembling. That's when every door in the hallway slammed shut at the same time. The echo was deafening. Kyle shouted and sprinted toward the exit, and I had no choice but to follow. But the farther we ran, the more disoriented I became. The hallways didn't look the same anymore. Corners seemed to twist in directions that shouldn't exist. Doors appeared where there hadn't been doors before. Through all of it, I kept hearing that same whisper, closer and closer, until it felt like it was right in my ear. "Don't leave me here." Finally, after what felt like forever, Kyle shoved open a side door that led straight outside. The cold night air hit me, and I almost collapsed onto the grass. We sprinted to the fence, scrambled over it, and didn't stop until we were back at his car. We sat there in silence for a long time, catching our breath. Finally, Kyle broke it. He asked if I had looked at the file on the desk. I told him yes. His face went pale, because he had looked at it too. The name he saw written on it was his. Story 3. The old factory. When I was 22, I worked at a warehouse just outside my city. A few blocks down from it stood an old textile factory that had been closed since the late 80s. The place was massive, 5 stories tall, with shattered windows, rusted catwalks, and a smokestack that loomed over the whole neighborhood like a dead monument. Everyone who worked near there said the same thing: don't go inside. It wasn't just because of safety hazards or collapsing floors. There were stories. People claimed to hear machinery running in the middle of the night, even though the power had been cut decades ago. Others swore they saw lights in the upper windows, flickering like welding torches. A security guard once told me he quit after hearing footsteps following him on every patrol, even when he was alone. Of course, I didn't listen. One Friday night, a couple coworkers and I had a few drinks after our shift, and someone brought up the factory. By the end of the night, 3 of us had dared each other to go check it out. I remember thinking it would be nothing more than a spooky adventure, just empty floors, broken equipment, maybe some raccoons. We went around 1 a.m. The streets were dead quiet, the air heavy with that metallic city smell. We climbed through a broken window on the first floor, and immediately the temperature dropped. The air inside was damp and cold, like walking into a basement. The ground floor was littered with old machinery, belts and gears frozen in place under layers of dust. Our footsteps echoed and the whole building groaned like it was alive. One of my friends, Derek, whistled, and the sound bounced around until it felt like it was coming from every corner at once. We made our way up to the second floor. That's when things started getting strange. Lying in the middle of the hallway was a single boot. Not old and rotted, but fairly new, like someone had left it there recently. Next to it was a set of footprints in the dust, leading down the hall. But they stopped abruptly in the middle of the floor. No turn, no smudge, no return path. Just stopped. We were freaked out, but tried to laugh it off. Derek said maybe the guy walked backward in his own tracks, but I couldn't shake the thought that something else had erased the prints. We reached the 4th floor, and that's when we heard it, the sound of chains rattling, like they were being pulled across metal, and we froze, holding our breath. Derek whispered that it was probably wind moving loose pipes. But then the sound changed. From rattling to dragging, heavy dragging, coming closer. That was enough. We started heading back toward the stairs, moving quickly but trying not to run. That's when the lights came on. For just a second, overhead bulbs flickered to life, humming faintly. Not all of them. Just a line of lights leading down the hallway ahead of us, one by one, like they were guiding something straight toward us. And then, from the far end of the hall, came a metallic scream. It sounded like steel grinding against steel, high-pitched and violent, echoing through the entire building. We didn't stay to see what caused it. We ran, tripping over debris, nearly breaking our necks as we bolted down the stairs. The scream followed us, sharp and piercing, until the second we leaped out the window we'd crawled through. The moment we hit the pavement outside, the building went silent. The lights inside were dark again. None of us ever went back. But every time I drove past that factory after work, I swore I could see someone standing in the top window. A dark silhouette, perfectly still, watching. Story 4. The House in the Woods. This happened 3 years ago, when I was working as a surveyor in rural Pennsylvania. Part of my job involved hiking into remote areas to map land boundaries, sometimes miles away from the nearest road. Most of the time, it was boring. Just trees, creeks, and endless hills. But one day I stumbled on something that still haunts me. I was deep in a stretch of forest that had no trails. My GPS said I was a good 5 miles from the nearest property line. That's when I saw it, a cabin. It wasn't marked on any map, and judging by the rotting wood and sagging roof, it had been there for decades. Something about it felt wrong. The clearing around it was completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the air felt heavier, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped onto the creaking porch and pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of mold and old smoke. The furniture was still intact. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a bed frame in the corner. But everything was covered in a layer of dust, except for one thing. On the table were candles. Thick, black candles, melted down to stubs, and the wax was fresh, still soft, still smelling faintly of sulfur. I told myself maybe some teenagers had come out here to mess around, but then I heard it, upstairs. The sound of slow, heavy breathing. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. I backed out of the cabin, careful not to make a sound, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. When I reached the tree line, I couldn't resist looking back one last time. And in the upstairs window, behind a cracked curtain, was a face. Pale, motionless, smiling. I don't remember running back to my truck. I don't remember starting the engine. I just remember driving until I saw another person. I never went back to that forest. And I never reported the cabin, because some part of me feels like it isn't supposed to be found. Abandoned buildings all look the same on the surface. Rotting wood, broken windows, walls covered in graffiti. They feel like empty shells. Forgotten places with no life left inside. But the truth is, they aren't empty. They hold every moment, every memory, every trace of the people who once filled them. The laughter, the screams, the silence that came after. And sometimes, if you step inside, it feels like those echoes are still there, waiting. Maybe it's the human brain playing tricks. Maybe it's just shadows, dust, and fear feeding off itself. Or maybe some places don't forget. Maybe they refuse to die. All I know is this. Every person I ever talked to who went exploring inside an abandoned building swore they came out different. They heard something, saw something, felt something they couldn't explain. And every one of them says the same thing at the end. They'll never go back.